Well, welcome to Your City on Community 7 Television. I'm Shoots Veis and I'm your host. Each month we look at a different aspect of what's going on with the city of Billings. This month we're very excited to have Ben Halverson with us. Ben is a prosecutor in the Domestic Violence Unit with the city of Billings. Ben, thanks for coming down and being on the show with us.
Thank you for having me.
All right. Well, we're going to dig in a lot to what you do in the city attorney's office and in the criminal division. But before we do that, let's get to meet you a little bit. Did you grow up in Billings? Did you come to the area? Give us a little history, a little background.
Yeah, born and raised in Billings, went to West High. Went to Gonzaga when I was a younger man, law school at the University of Montana, and chose to live here where I met my wife. We just had our first baby, Miles. So yeah, Billings, born and raised, and I'll be here forever.
Yeah, very good. And then what kind of sparked your interest in going to law school, becoming a lawyer? What were some of the influences in your life that kind of led you down that path?
You know, I had always believed from an early age that public service is important, and it's important to attract people who are dedicated to it, not just people who do it because there's no other option. I want to do this, and I thought being a lawyer, working in public service is the best way to serve the public.
All right. Now, when you graduated from law school, did you come and work right away for the city of Billings, or did you work elsewhere for a while, or how did you get recruited to come work for the city of Billings?
Well, Shoots, I was actually going to go to tax school and not wanting to extend law school any further than absolutely necessary. I came to Billings. I worked for Scott Twido for 2 years at the county attorney's office and joined the city in 2015 to work as the domestic violence prosecutor.
Okay, all right. So most of us that are not in the law profession know about lawyers because we watch them on TV, and that's kind of our perception of what it is that you guys do as lawyers. But give us maybe a rundown. What is it? What's it really like day to day? What are you guys doing day in and day out in that law practice, and how is that different from what we see on TV shows?
Well, there are 4 other prosecutors in the criminal division. And I would say TV is kind of misleading. It gives people expectations that aren't really reasonable. Like, this case can be solved in an hour, or it's super obvious. You have computers figuring it out.
Yeah.
We're just kind of prosecuting misdemeanor offenses. We have a lot of volume, a lot of people coming in and out. And the domestic violence cases specifically, I meet with a number of victims of domestic violence with our domestic violence unit, and that has been a critical part of our job.
Sure. All right. So talk to us a little bit about how the city attorney's office is set up. Obviously, there's a criminal division, but I believe there's also a civil side. So give us kind of a broad overview of what the city's attorney's office is and what are some of the things that you guys do there.
So the city attorney's office has civil and criminal division. Our civil division handles a lot of stuff that is above my head. I'm not capable of understanding. A lot of land use stuff. I think zoning issues.
Sure.
Litigation when people sue the city, negotiations with the police department, things like that. Very complicated. I'm not capable of understanding that as far as I'm concerned. But the criminal division, just the 5 of us and essential support staff to keep things rolling. Pretty much at top speed all year.
Sure. Talk to us about the criminal division. You did work at the county attorney's office for a while, so let's do a little compare and contrast with what kind of crimes are you going to see at the Yellowstone County Attorney's Office, and what crimes are you going to see at the City of Billings City Attorney offices? What are the differences between those 2 offices?
Sure. So at the City Attorney's Office, we have jurisdiction over all misdemeanors occurring within the City of Billings that are investigated by the police department. So just misdemeanors. The County Attorney's Office investigates all felony offenses and those misdemeanors that occur outside the city boundaries.
Okay, all right. So are there types of crimes that come to your office but then get bumped over there? Are there crimes that are at their office that sometimes come back over to you guys?
Occasionally, I would say I in particular send more cases that direction.
Sure.
Just depending on the type of offense. We have it's relatively new, a strangulation statute that has necessitated more felony prosecutions of a very dangerous offense. And so we have a really good working relationship. and try to get those cases moved as quickly as possible so people, especially victims, can have their justice.
Sure. And we're going to dig a little bit deeper into the domestic violence unit in a little bit, but let's keep it as more of a broad overview. Sure. What are kind of some of the most common crimes that you guys see on the criminal side of things? What are you mostly dealing with?
So we are mostly dealing with a number of DUI offenses, a significant volume of those throughout the year. Thefts from various retailers, organizations, smaller stores in the city of Billings, various traffic offenses depending on how serious they are, and then the domestic violence offenses, assaults that occur commonly at the hospitals, things that happen downtown, open containers, situations like that.
Sure. Maybe what some of the more uncommon things that you guys would see, something that would come through your office that you don't think most people wouldn't think, oh, that's going to happen, and the city attorney is going to be involved in that.
Well, there are a number. I think they're called abatement cases. Mm-hmm. I'm going to really disappoint my boss here, but when property is kind of left to be ruined,
sure,
and is kind of in a blight situation, our office would handle that as well.
Okay. Do you work with the folks at the planning department, oh boy, their name escapes me right now, the code enforcement?
Yes.
Yeah, so you guys would work with code enforcement on the type of stuff they had. I'm assuming they don't bring a ton of cases your guys' way, but probably when they do, they're probably relatively serious.
Yeah, things are getting pretty bad when code enforcement will try to work with people as much as possible before involving the criminal justice system.
Sure, all right. Let's talk a little bit about the domestic violence unit. How long has the city of Billings had a domestic violence unit, and what is it that you guys are doing specifically in the domestic violence unit?
Well, since at least the year 2000, our office has been funded in part by the Violence Against Women Act. It funds prosecutors, law enforcement throughout the country. That initially funded a victim witness specialist. That's the person who makes contact with victims. The two we have now who make me look way better than I deserve. And then that grant now also funds part of my job. So ever since I have been an attorney, and dating back at least 3 prosecutors who served in this role before me, there has been a domestic violence unit.
All right. And is the reason there's a domestic violence unit, is that just kind of sticks out as a more crime happening, or it's just such a specialized area of law that you really need to have those, or is it a little bit of both?
It's super specialized. I think these cases are hard. We are serving in a role that involves, emotional support, day-to-day kind of legal support to the extent we can provide it for a number of victims. Volume was very high last year. The highest I've ever had. It was about 1,200 cases, and normal year would be between 600 to 800. Mm-hmm. And it requires patience, dedication to details, understanding of things that happen in those relationships. And being prepared to be, you have to deal with a lot of emotion, and you have to be prepared professionally to be let down sometimes. And that can be very hard for prosecutors. It's not for everybody. People, when I tell them what I do for a living, kind of think like, oh my God, why would you want to do that? And it is very rewarding. By and large, we are fortunate to be in this position, and I am lucky to specialize. I really enjoy what we do. And I enjoy working with people who like and benefit from our help in any kind of way.
Sure. Let's talk a little bit about those victim witness specialists that you talked about. If I'm correct, they work for the police department. Is that right, or do they work for the city attorney's office?
They work for the city attorney's office.
Okay. And is there a domestic violence coordinator also in the police department as well?
There's a domestic violence investigator.
Oh, okay, there we go. Yeah.
Officer Katie Nash.
Yes.
Who works exclusively with us. She does do some felony investigations that would maybe have started with our office.
Sure.
So there are 4 of us.
Okay. So when a case comes to you guys, I'm assuming it's, there was a 911 call and the police arrived and they witnessed what they witnessed, and then they pass that information along to you. Is that kind of how the process gets to you to begin with?
Yes, very, very rarely is domestic violence witnessed by anyone other than the two people involved. Often children are involved as witnesses. And if someone calls law enforcement, whether it's a minor child, sometimes it could be a neighbor, whatever happens, law enforcement, when they respond, if they believe they can make an arrest, they are obligated by law to do that for safety reasons. And then that's when I would get the case.
Okay. And then do you have, we've talked about a lot on not only on this show, but also on the York County show about Yellowstone County Detention Center.
Sure.
Do you get involved then in deciding whether or not that person is going to be in jail for a while, or really they're not that big of a risk? Is that something that you get involved with, or is that left up to the judge more?
Well, the judge makes the ultimate decision on that. We are very cognizant of the demands on the detention facility. I think they've housed a number of Department of Corrections inmates, and so especially with the pandemic, we've tried to work with them to keep their population manageable. My cases are a little bit different because the people I prosecute have to go to jail prior to the case beginning for those safety reasons I told you about.
Yeah.
So I also have to be cognizant of the kind of cases I prosecute to make sure we are actually able to send someone to jail.
Sure. Now that crime rolls into you, it comes across your desk, and what are some of the things that you're looking at to decide whether or not I want to prosecute this case or not? What are some of the decision points that you're going to look at to move forward, or to say this one's just not gonna fly?
Yeah. So all the cases that I have where there was an on-scene arrest, I prosecute those cases. That decision's already been made by law enforcement. There are a number of cases where offenders will run from law enforcement, will hide. There will be other cases where maybe law enforcement didn't feel like it had enough information or evidence to make that determination on scene. And I'm commonly looking for those offenders who are most potentially dangerous and potentially lethal to their partners. There are decades worth of research on this, and those offenders who control daily finances, relationships, verbally abusive towards animals. Those offenders I am much more concerned about than I am an offender who, say, just had a really bad day. It's obviously still legal, still unlawful to assault your partner or family member, but we know much more about domestic violence than we did ever before, and so we are focused on those who are most likely to either reassault or commit a homicide.
Are there cases then, some of those ones that you say, like, yep, it's still illegal, it still shouldn't be done, but you have a lot of experience doing this now, and you can look at this and say, rather than prosecute this, maybe I can divert this to a different outcome, or can you make that decision? And if so, what are those diversions that you're allowed to send somebody off towards?
So I do make those decisions all the time. Like I told you last year, we had the most insane and unmanageable volume, I think, maybe of anybody in the state on the misdemeanor level.
Yeah.
And I had to let a lot of people go. I had to decline a lot of cases that I would have normally prosecuted just for volume purposes. I don't defer prosecution of a case when I first get it. Either what I'm looking for is either there's enough evidence or there isn't, or maybe I'll hold on to a case if it's got a component. Maybe that's a felony or a case that I currently have.
Sure. All right. Are there, I know sometimes there's, in other courts, there's a drug court that they can send somebody to, or treatment court or something like that. Do you guys have anything similar along those lines in the domestic violence realm?
So that is a really good question. Domestic violence is often referred, it's not an addiction, and it's not a mental illness. It's commonly based on personality disorders, which are notoriously difficult to treat. So treatment courts for domestic violence offenders are not as common in the state of Montana. I know Judge Carter is starting his in the Yellowstone County Justice Court. Treatment is very difficult. Many studies suggest that what we're offering now, which is 40 hours, which law requires, it would be more like 2,000 hours of counseling and mental health treatment, behavior adjustments, things like that, which is what most people work in a year, and obviously that's not really feasible for any of the 50 states.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you find that there's a lot of co-occurring here with mental health issues in domestic violence, or substance abuse issues in domestic violence? Are those things kind of happening at the same time, or really they're separate deals?
The statistics and data show that domestic abusers are likely to be abusive even without a substance. If a substance is a cause of a disorder, we'll usually be able to detect that during the course of a case. Someone who has a serious addiction and only really acts out when they're in the throes of that addiction, but otherwise is not controlling, not verbally abusive, if that makes sense.
Sure.
And I'm sorry, I missed what was the end of
Well,
the
I mean, is that something you see fairly often, or it's kind of rare to see those things co-occurring together at the same time?
I would say it's very common. What's most common actually is number of victims who have co-occurring dependency in a relationship and perhaps a component drug or addiction issue. And so, we are kind of fighting two front wars. One with possibly a substance abuse addiction, and two, a very dangerous relationship. And our goal is to try to get a victim some respite from their abuser. So the hope is that if their abuser is taken away and they can focus on themselves, that those co-occurring problems will start to dissipate.
Sure, absolutely. So let's take it a step further now. We've talked a little bit about, okay, this case comes to you and you look at it and you go, you know what, I've got a pretty good case here. I'm going to go ahead and prosecute it. What are kind of the next steps after that happens? If you've made the decision, I'm going ahead with this one.
For all those cases that haven't already been arrested, a warrant will go down to the police department. I'll apply for a warrant from Judge Kolar. A warrant will go to the police department. Law enforcement will try to execute that warrant and serve it on the offender. And it's a very critical time because once a victim reports that, once an abuser perhaps knows that she has reported it, there are serious danger concerns.
Sure.
And so to the extent we can get them arrested as soon as possible after the incident, we definitely try.
Yeah.
The police department, as most people know, is completely overwhelmed, and still with the tremendous gift from taxpayers to stabilize our budget, we still have a lot of work to do.
Yeah, all right. So if that person is then arrested, again, probably depending upon the level of violence that's involved there, are they going to reside in jail? Are they going to be in some sort of a release situation until they've had a chance to move the case forward?
Some offenders will stay in jail, either because the bond is too high, they can't afford it, or the bond is so high because we have asked for it to be that way. Most people who get very high bonds, we've already had history with them in the system. Offenders who cut off electronic monitoring, for example, rarely does that go well after they cut off the monitor. There are some people who do need to be incarcerated, unfortunately, prior to a trial or adjudication of their case, just because there have been too many subsequent crimes maybe associated with the same victim.
Sure.
They're not allowed to have contact with their victims while the case is pending, which is a constant problem.
Yeah.
And so if they're arrested on that offense, they are probably more likely to be in jail.
All right. And then are most of the folks that you're going to prosecute, are they going to be defended by a public defender? Is that usually how the system works?
Yes, because all my cases I prosecute, and I would say the vast majority of the cases we prosecute at the city attorney's office do carry jail time. And for those offenders who cannot afford an attorney, the Constitution demands that they be appointed one. And so the vast majority of cases we do prosecute involve work with the public defender's office.
All right. Does the public defender's office have someone who's in a similar type role with you, except of course on the defense side, but specializes in domestic violence, or do you kind of see the same handful of lawyers who have some idea of what's going on with this specific area of the law?
Yeah, just like with prosecutors, there are public defenders who really may prefer to work in a certain area, dependent neglect cases, drug cases, whatever it is that they may prefer to do, and work with that kind of defendant to help them out. Just like with prosecutors, working with domestic abusers can be challenging, it can be very time consuming, it can be very emotionally draining, and so not all attorneys would be cut out for something like that. Doesn't mean they're bad attorneys, just means that they wouldn't be interested in kind of working that high volume of emotional intensity.
Sure. All right. And so then once they have a public defender, do you guys kind of usually have your facts and get together and decide if you want to, work your way through the case without a judge, or how often does it end up going to trial, or kind of walk us through that aspect of it?
Well, the way the volume is now, the system, and I think across the country, is geared towards plea negotiations. That's just a reality of the system we have at this time. If there are cases that need to go to trial, there's no hard feelings. We'll absolutely just do that and let the jury decide. I think we have good relationship with the public defender's office, and those cases we can get resolved that are fair to both parties, the city and the defendant. We will absolutely make every chance to do that.
All right. You talked about some of the hardships of doing this. Maybe talk a little bit about what are some of the emotional things that you have to deal with in being involved in cases that are family members that are tough. You touched on it a little bit earlier, but I want you to expand on what do you as the lawyer have to go through in these cases that are very emotionally charged?
Well, I think the first time anybody hears a child calling 911 during a domestic violence incident is absolutely heartbreaking. It's really hard for people to hear that and hard for people to understand how that could occur in front of a child. Those can be particularly draining. A lot of conversations that we have with victims where we'll hear what abusers do. Maybe they won't be illegal, but they will say some of the most cruel and demeaning things to women who would otherwise be strong. A lot of professionals, we've had physicians as victims who are totally stable and in a strong position in their professional lives, but their personal life is very challenging, and it's seeing someone be completely crippled by someone whose sole desire is to control them can be very challenging.
Yeah. Is there coping mechanisms that you guys have? I'm sure there's other, domestic violent prosecutors across the way. Are there coping mechanisms out there for lawyers such as yourself that are in these difficult situations?
Yeah, I mean, I think having the ability to bounce ideas off colleagues and kind of vent to colleagues. I'm not afraid to announce or tell people I see a counselor. My wife is not super interested in these stories all the time.
Sure.
And so, it's important for me to just, voice my frustrations and kind of leave it on the table and come home every day and just be ready to live my family life.
Yeah, absolutely. You touched on this a little bit, but within the criminal division, you said I think there's 4 other attorneys. Is that correct?
Right.
Do you? I imagine with your caseload, probably not too. But do you guys ever work kind of as a team or on cases together, or does everybody just kind of have their specialty area?
We do commonly work as a team, especially since I was out on paternity leave. They saved me and allowed me to enjoy that time. We do commonly work together, kind of to make sure we're doing the right thing or make sure that we've discussed complicated issues all together. And while we each have our own cases, I think we sometimes will share a lot of defendants charged with different crimes.
Sure.
And so we do collaborate frequently.
All right. And then did you, I know you said, you had kind of the highest uptick that you'd ever seen during the pandemic. Were there other areas of the criminal division that saw a dip, and could they maybe help you a little bit?
I think crime as a whole was up dramatically in 2020. The other prosecutors are tremendous, and to the extent that they can help me, they absolutely do. But really the system, the court system and the jail are the ultimate limiting factors. Doesn't matter how many people we have.
Sure.
Our ability to process those cases is ultimately going to be limited by that.
All right. Are there other cities in Montana or counties in Montana that have these kind of specific domestic violence offices? Are there colleagues across Montana that you can kind of reach out to and, hey, I got this going on, or this seems really different, or just to bounce ideas off of?
Sure. There was Ami in Bozeman. Mm-hmm. She left that position a few years ago, but she was the Bozeman City Domestic Violence Prosecutor, and she and I continue to discuss domestic violence legislation. I constantly ask her for help, questions. The prosecutors in Missoula are particularly knowledgeable, and having relationships with prosecutors throughout the state is really beneficial for your experience and being able to approach cases the right way.
Sure. Well, of course, it wouldn't be 2020 or 2021 if I didn't ask you a little bit about COVID. So what kind of precautions did your office have to put in place because of COVID? What kind of things are you guys doing to make sure that your office stays healthy, that the city court stays healthy, that the defendants stay healthy? What kind of precautions are you guys taking?
In a normal year, I would try to meet with at least 100 victims of domestic violence over the course of a fiscal year. We were not able to do that as much this year for practical reasons. Kind of as things evolved, the focus on services kind of became less of a problem and more with masking. So we do have to limit the number of people who come by. We do have staff continuing to work from home on a rotating basis.
Sure.
But by and large, we got through the worst part of it unscathed, and I hope this will be over soon. I probably speak for everyone when I say that.
I think you do speak for everyone when you say that, absolutely. Are there any other things that you guys have been doing because you put COVID in place that you said, you know what, this works pretty well, and I'm going to use this kind of maybe as an outreach or something to do going forward, even when there's not necessarily a restriction that you need to be 6 feet from someone?
I think there's things have, ironically, though the criminal justice system has slowed down with regard to jury trials, I think moving some things onto video have made things a little bit easier for people. Made the courtroom less crowded, and when you're not in court, you miss out on some details. But when you're in court, things can also move a little bit slower, and so there have been some benefits to it that I think may stay in place. I think it just depends on what Judge Kolar would like to do.
Sure, absolutely. Have you noticed at all that it's been helpful that maybe those two folks that were involved in this dispute are on video rather than in the same courtroom together? Have you noticed that at all?
So, prior to the pandemic, I have frequently, when offenders are required to come to court for whatever court date, it's not uncommon for them to appear with the victim. Obviously, that's a problem. They're not supposed to be together. They're not supposed to be together in court. It doesn't matter. And so it is, I suspect that a lot of conduct like that we are not picking up on and not able to identify because those offenders do not have to come to court. We lose the ability to contact victims and meet with them more frequently when offenders are not having to come to court. So there are definitely some drawbacks.
All right. Gaze into your crystal ball a little bit. What do you see coming maybe in the next 3 to 5 years within the domestic violence unit with the City of Billings? What do you see kind of coming down, some of the changes that might be coming your way?
Well, we would like to at some point add another domestic violence prosecutor, another victim witness specialist to kind of work in our team. Splitting the caseload as it exists right now would put me back where I was when I first started at the city, actually. My caseload's doubled in that 6-year period.
Yeah.
So I think that would be the ideal, and we, having more staff, more people available to meet and really reach out to victims is very critical.
All right. Well, Ben, thank you so much for coming down and visiting with us today and talking to us about the City Criminal Office and especially the Domestic Violence Unit. It's very interesting, and I would just say on behalf of me and everyone who lives in Billings, thank you for what you do. I know it's emotionally draining. I know it's a difficult job. We appreciate your public service, and thank you for all you do for the City of Billings.
Well, thank you, and thank you to the people I work with. More importantly, they deserve a lot of that credit, too.
All right. Thanks.
Thank you.